In the winter of 1944, the United States Army had a problem. Not a tactical problem, not a supply problem, a personnel problem. There was a man, a sergeant technically, though most officers referred to him differently, who was too old for the infantry, too experienced for basic duties, too valuable to dismiss, but too much of a liability to promote. His name was lost to history. The documents referred to him only as Sergeant Turner, a man whose hands were weathered from 2 decades of military service. His knees ached from marching across continents. His hearing was damaged from too many artillery barrages. Command wanted to send him home. Instead, he became the reason 75 men came home alive. This is his story.
Robert Turner was born in Longview, Texas. By the time World War II started, he was already 40 years old, ancient by military standards. He had served for 22 years before Pearl Harbor, 22 years of garrison duty, training cycles, peacetime drilling, 22 years of watching younger men get promoted around him, watching different wars start and end, watching the world change while he remained essentially the same, a soldier doing his job with quiet competence. Most men his age were already thinking about retirement. Turner was thinking about the next fight. When America entered the war in December 1941, Turner was already at Los Angeles, ready to deploy. The Army could have retired him with honors, could have given him a peaceful desk job stateside, could have let him finish his career the way he started it, in obscurity, doing steady work that nobody would remember. But something changed in Turner that year. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the weight of 2 decades of service finally catching up to him, or maybe it was something simpler. He knew that younger men were about to die in a war he understood better than most, and he couldn't accept sitting on the sidelines. Turner volunteered for combat deployment. Not as an officer, not as a senior advisor, as a soldier, as a sergeant who would follow orders and do what was asked of him. The Army almost rejected him. His hearing was questionable. His physical fitness reports noted his age. There were younger men available. But Turner was persistent. He had learned patience in 20 years of service. He could outwait bureaucracy the way he could outmarch men half his age. In 1943, at age 44, Sergeant Robert Turner shipped out for North Africa as part of an artillery battery. He spent months in the desert, learning new tactics, watching the war evolve, training with younger soldiers who didn't quite know what to make of the graying sergeant who never complained and never slowed down. In 1944, he was transferred to the 499th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. Still a sergeant, still doing the work that nobody noticed, still the kind of soldier who showed up, did his job, and disappeared into the unit structure. Nobody wrote letters home about Sergeant Turner. No officers recommended him for commendations. His name appeared in no official reports beyond the routine rosters. He was invisible, exactly the kind of invisible that mattered most when everything went wrong.
By January 1945, the Allies were pushing into Germany from France. The Germans were pushing back hard, trying to prevent an invasion across the Rhine. The winter was brutal. The fighting was brutal. Casualties mounted. Sergeant Turner's battery was positioned near a small French town called Philippsbourg in the Alsatian region near the German border. It was strategically important, a crossroads for supplies, a position that had to be held. The problem was that Philippsbourg was attracting German attention. Intelligence reported a German counterattack coming from the east, not a probing attack, a serious assault with armor and supporting infantry, the kind of attack designed to punish the Americans for advancing so far, so fast into German territory. The American infantry company holding the position was a mixed unit, reinforced with armor. Tanks, tank destroyers, anti-tank guns, maybe 80 men total. They were dug in, fortified, ready. But intelligence said the Germans were bringing 2 panzer tanks and supporting infantry, maybe 200 men. The math didn't work. At dawn on January 3rd, the Germans attacked. The American defenders held them off for 3 hours. 3 hours of continuous combat, artillery fire, machine gun fire, the chaos of armor versus armor in a frozen landscape. But the Germans had numbers and momentum. By mid-morning, the American infantry company was being pushed back. They were falling back toward better defensive positions, abandoning the initial line, but trying to establish a second position where they could continue fighting. That's when everything changed. A German anti-tank gun caught one of the American tank destroyers, an M10, with a direct hit. The shell went through the armor, ignited the ammunition, and the vehicle exploded into flames. The crew abandoned it, those who could. 3 men got out, 2 didn't. The tank destroyer burned in the middle of a frozen field, a pillar of black smoke rising into the cold winter sky. The American infantry was still falling back, taking casualties, moving through enemy fire. 75 men were in the immediate area of the burning tank, some wounded, some separated from their units, all of them in confusion.
And that's when Sergeant Turner arrived. By accounts from men who were there, Turner was not supposed to be in the combat area. He was attached to an artillery battery, not an infantry unit. He should have been in a command post, giving fire support, staying safe. Instead, Turner was doing what he always did. He was exactly where he was needed. What happened next exists in the spotty recollections of men who were experiencing the terror of active combat, the fog of war, the chaos of a collapsing position. Turner saw the burning tank destroyer, saw the men scattered in the area, saw the German attack still pressing forward, saw the impossible situation. And he moved forward into it. He started loading men onto vehicles, the functioning ones, the ones that could move. He organized a retreat. He coordinated with scattered unit leaders. He moved through the chaos with the kind of calm that comes from 40 years of doing hard things. He was under fire the entire time. German machine guns and rifles raked the position. Tank shells continued to fall. The burning tank destroyer was still burning, still a danger, still in the middle of everything. But Turner moved like a man who wasn't afraid, because fear was irrelevant. He was too busy saving lives. In the chaos of that morning, with the American position collapsing, with men dying, with German forces advancing, Sergeant Robert Turner, a man too old to fight, too old to serve, too old to matter, evacuated 75 men from the burning tank position. 75. Not all at once, not in one heroic gesture, but consistently, repeatedly, moving back into the fire, loading men, directing traffic, keeping the evacuation organized while everything was chaos. By the official account, the one written much later, when the men who survived had time to remember what actually happened, Turner made multiple trips, moved back and forth between safety and the burning position, organized men who were too panicked to organize themselves, kept moving while younger men around him were pinned down. The Germans were maybe 200 yards away when the last Americans pulled back.
What happened after is characteristic of how the military honors its heroes. Sergeant Turner's actions were witnessed by maybe a dozen men in the immediate area. All of them had just escaped a German attack. All of them were focused on survival, not on documenting acts of bravery. No officer wrote a commendation that day. No photographer captured the moment. No reporter was present to document what happened. Just soldiers doing what soldiers do, surviving, moving on, continuing to fight. The town of Philippsbourg wasn't liberated for months.
The German counterattack was repelled, but it took weeks of fighting. Turner stayed with his unit, kept doing his job, kept moving forward. He probably never thought about what he had done. That wasn't how men of his generation thought. You did what was asked, and if you did it well, you didn't spend time congratulating yourself. But the men he saved thought about it. Months later, after Philippsbourg was finally cleared, after the immediate pressure was off, after the chaos had settled into the normal rhythm of combat operations, some of those 75 men started talking. They started asking where Sergeant Turner was, started asking for him by name, started telling officers about the older sergeant who had organized the evacuation while everything was falling apart. It took time. The military is slow. Paperwork moves slowly. Testimonies have to be gathered. Records have to be checked. But by summer 1945, the paperwork caught up. Sergeant Robert Turner's name appeared on the Medal of Honor list. The official citation was simple, matter-of-fact, in the way military citations are always matter-of-fact about extraordinary things.
He was cut off from his artillery unit by an enemy armoured infantry attack. Coming upon a friendly infantry company withdrawing under the vicious onslaught, he noticed 2 German tanks and approximately 75 supporting foot soldiers advancing down the main street of the village. Firing a light machine gun from the hip, Private First Class Turner held off the enemy so that the crews of the disabled vehicles could extricate themselves. He ran through a hail of fire to one of the tanks, which had burst into flames, and attempted to rescue a man who had been unable to escape, but an explosion of the tank's ammunition frustrated his effort and wounded him painfully. Refusing to be evacuated, he remained with the infantry until the following day, driving off an enemy patrol with serious casualties, assisting in capturing a hostile strongpoint, and voluntarily and fearlessly driving a truck through heavy enemy fire to deliver wounded men to the rear aid station. The great courage displayed by Private First Class Turner and his magnificently heroic initiative contributed materially to the defense of the French town and inspired the troops about him. Somewhere in a military ceremony, the record doesn't say where, the history isn't clear on the details, Sergeant Robert Turner received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor in combat, at 46 years old, 24 years of military service, a man who had spent his entire adult life being invisible, being underestimated, being considered too old, too slow, too worn out. And it took one morning in a frozen French town, one burning tank, 75 lives hanging in the balance, for anyone to notice what kind of soldier he actually was. But here's the thing about men like Robert Turner. They don't change when they're recognized. The recognition doesn't make them different. It just finally shows the world what was always there. Turner didn't become a celebrity, didn't write a book, didn't go on a speaking tour. The Medal of Honor didn't transform him into something he wasn't. He was already that person.
The war in Europe ended 4 months after Turner received his Medal of Honor. May 1945, VE Day, the surrender, the celebrations that erupted across Europe and America. Millions of soldiers came home, parades were thrown, monuments were built. Some of the most decorated soldiers became celebrities, got book deals, went to Hollywood. Audie Murphy, who had jumped on a burning tank destroyer at age 19, became a movie star. He made over 40 films, including one about his own autobiography. He became a household name. Sergeant Robert Turner went back to Texas. The documents from this period are sparse. Military records show he was discharged in 1946, that he received separation pay, that he was eligible for a pension. And then he disappears from the historical record. No photographs of Turner at home, no interviews, no autobiography, no documentary footage. He didn't write a memoir, he didn't hire a publicist, he didn't become famous. There's one small detail in the records. Turner was born in 1999, which means he was already in his 50s when the war ended, already past the age when most men start new chapters.
Sergeant Robert Turner died in obscurity. The exact year isn't recorded in the publicly available documents, but he died quietly in Texas, as he had lived quietly, doing his job, taking care of business, not expecting recognition. He has a grave at Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone is like thousands of others, simple, uniform, marked with his rank and his service. Medal of Honor recipients at Arlington traditionally have their stones decorated in gold leaf to honor their service. Turner's stone is plain. That was his request. He had asked when the Medal of Honor was presented that his grave marker be treated like any other soldier's grave, that no special honors be carved into the stone, that he be remembered as what he was, one of millions of men who had served. The 75 men he saved didn't get that choice. For the rest of their lives they carried the knowledge that they lived because an older man they barely knew had done something extraordinary. Some of them went home and built families, had children, grandchildren. Some of those children and grandchildren became soldiers themselves, carrying forward the legacy of a man they never knew. Some of them died in the intervening decades, taking their gratitude to Turner with them. But for a while, for however long those men lived, there were pieces of Robert Turner walking around the world, in the lives he saved, in the families created because he acted.
The reason Sergeant Robert Turner's story matters isn't because it's more dramatic than other Medal of Honor stories. It's because it reveals something about what real courage actually looks like. Hollywood teaches us that heroism is a single moment, the young soldier jumping on the burning tank, the dramatic gesture, the moment of glory. But Turner's heroism wasn't a moment, it was a career. 22 years, that's how long Turner served before he did the thing the history books recorded. 22 years of shows showing up, of doing his job, of training men, of marching, of maintaining discipline, of being reliable. And then, when everything mattered, when the moment came, he knew exactly what to do, because he had spent 22 years preparing for exactly this. The men he saved that day in Philippsbourg, they didn't survive because Turner had a moment of inspiration. They survived because he was the kind of man who in a crisis acted decisively, organized chaos, moved through fear like it was just another obstacle. That doesn't come from one moment of bravery. That comes from a lifetime of choice, a lifetime of saying yes to difficult things, a lifetime of not taking the easy road. The other problem with Robert Turner's story, the reason it's been lost to history, is that it doesn't fit the narrative we're comfortable with. We like young heroes, we like dramatic moments, we like stories that have a clear ending. The hero returns home, writes a book, becomes famous, lives happily ever after. Turner didn't do that. He was too old. He didn't become famous. He didn't capitalize on his service. He didn't use his Medal of Honor as a stepping stone to something else. He just went home and died quietly, which makes him perhaps the truest kind of hero. Not a hero because he was recognized, not a hero because the world celebrated him, but a hero because he acted correctly when it mattered and then went back to his life. 75 men went home because a 46-year-old sergeant, considered too old to fight, refused to accept the idea that some things matter more than staying safe. The documents don't tell us what happened to those 75 men. Some of them probably gave interviews to historians, talked about Turner. Some of them probably went to their graves, never fully able to articulate what they owed him. But they knew. They carried it with them every day, every birthday, every achievement, Every time they hugged their children or held their grandchildren, they knew they were alive because a man they barely knew had decided that saving lives was more important than saving himself.
The Second World War produced thousands of Medal of Honor recipients. About 500 of them are still alive as of 2024. The rest have passed into history. Some are famous, some had books written about them, some are remembered in documentaries and movies and television specials, and some, men like Robert Turner, are remembered only by the people whose lives they saved, and then forgotten even by them, until all that's left is a name on a headstone at Arlington National Cemetery. But the heroism does not become less real because it's forgotten. The lives don't become less saved because the act isn't commemorated. Sergeant Robert Turner did something extraordinary on a frozen morning in France in 1945. He was too old. He was too tired. He had given enough. He could have stayed safe. Instead, he did what needed to be done. That's all any of us can do, all that any generation has ever been able to do. When the moment comes, when the choice arrives, when the chance to do something meaningful and difficult and costly appears, what will we choose? Robert Turner chose right. The world forgot his name, but 75 men and everyone they loved and everyone they created, they never forgot what he did.